2008. It was a year of conflicts, hunger, political crises, natural disasters, and the continued effects of climate change. But it was the meltdown of the world's financial markets that sent shockwaves around the globe. Worldwide, stock prices have fallen sharply, credit is tight, and major financial institutions have collapsed. Many developed economies are already in recession, and growth in most developing countries is slowing significantly. The economic slowdown, combined with soaring food prices and rising unemployment, is threatening people's basic security in many parts of the world. United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon.
Poor people around the world look to the United Nations for help and solidarity. We are accountable to them. Here in this house, everyone counts. So let us live up to our responsibility.
This year, the United Nations marked 60 years of peacekeeping. 110,000 blue berets from across the globe, more than ever before, are deployed in 19 peacekeeping missions worldwide. From protecting civilians, to removing dangerous landmines, to rebuilding shattered nations, and registering people to vote, they're often on the front lines. And perhaps nowhere more so than in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, where heavy fighting in the country's eastern region between the army and Tutsi rebels displaced 250,000 people. Many of the conflict's victims were desperate for shelter. UNHCR officer Ibrahima Koli.
There is a sentiment of panic here. The security is the first priority. The second priority is food, as you may know.
Safety is a huge challenge, even here in camps for the displaced. Women like Monique face a constant threat of rape or being beaten, even when going out to collect firewood for cooking. The Security Council authorized 3,000 more peacekeeping troops. And the UN sent Special Envoy Olusegun Obasanjo to the region for peace talks.
Just let us fight and struggle for peace.
Meanwhile, security is deteriorating elsewhere in Africa, jeopardizing the UN's efforts to bring aid and to protect civilians. In war-torn Darfur, nearly 5 million civilians are caught up in the conflict between rebels and government troops. John Holmes, UN Emergency Relief Coordinator.
In the absence of any real progress towards a solution, whatever the efforts of the international community and this Council, profound human suffering will continue to grow in Darfur.
UNAMID, the joint mission between the United Nations and the African Union, is building up strength. But less than half of the 26,000 peacekeepers approved by the Security Council have been deployed, and attacks on aid workers have doubled since last year. Despite the challenges, the role of the UN is critical here, as Messenger of Peace actor George Clooney said.
When I stood in the hospital next to women who'd been raped and set on fire 2 days earlier, they looked up to me and said, please send the UN. Not the US, not China, not Russia, just the UN. You're their only hope.
Another humanitarian crisis continues in Somalia, where violence has claimed more than 1,000 lives this year alone. The UN is helping the 3.2 million people who need food after 3 years of drought. Mark Bowden, humanitarian coordinator for Somalia.
Being that we think after 3 years of drought and this prolonged crisis, we're at a stage where the population could be facing total destitution.
International Navy vessels have to protect the food deliveries from rampant pirate attacks. And in Zimbabwe, inflation rates of 231 million% have left the country on the verge of collapse. Once considered the breadbasket of Africa, now 2 million people in Zimbabwe depend on food assistance. Soon, the number could double, but access to the country is restricted. Making matters worse, a cholera outbreak that began in the open sewers of urban townships has infected nearly 14,000 people and claimed some 800 lives. crises were not limited to Africa. In Georgia, 200,000 people were uprooted when the country's military clashed with Russian and separatist South Ossetian troops. The UN's Refugee Agency and its Children's Fund provided services for the refugees before the harsh winter set in. Maria Kalivis, UNICEF.
These children cry at night, are worried, are more insecure, and keep on asking, when are we going back?
And the plight of refugees around the world continues to be a high priority for the UN in places like Afghanistan, where insurgent attacks have intensified and where about 2 million Afghanis are still unable to return home. In Iraq, as levels of violence constantly fluctuate, the United Nations continues to offer development and humanitarian assistance in a dangerous and complex environment. 5 months of ceasefire between Israel and Palestine ended in November with renewed rocket attacks and airstrikes. When Israel closed the border, 1.5 million people in Gaza faced acute food and fuel shortages. The international community, meanwhile, continued its effort to bring the two parties to the negotiating table. Shimon Peres, President of Israel.
If there is a will, as the Arabs are saying, there is a way. What was today demonstrated is the will. We know that we have to work for the way.
Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas.
We remain committed to international legitimacy and extend our hands for dialogue.
While India and Pakistan were delicately moving toward improved relations, terror attacks in Mumbai shocked the world. Nearly 200 people were killed and more than 300 injured. At a meeting to promote the culture of peace and interfaith dialogue, world leaders agreed to reject the use of religion to justify terror. Earlier in the year, Pope Benedict visited the United Nations and expressed his hope for dialogue between religions to build a common world. Pope Benedict.
Recognition of the transcendent value of every man and woman favors conversion of heart, which then leads to a commitment to resist violence, terrorism and war, and to promote justice and peace.
With Kosovo unilaterally declaring independence in February, the UN's peacekeeping role there is coming to an end. But tensions remain. The country's Serb minority protested fiercely against the decision, and UN police were called to restore calm. Also in the Balkans, one of the world's most wanted men, Radovan Karadzic, was arrested after more than a decade on the run. He was indicted by the UN tribunal for war crimes in the former Yugoslavia. 2008 was also a year in which catastrophic natural disasters hit some of the poorest people in the world. Haiti was slammed by 4 consecutive hurricanes, causing almost 900 deaths, including 90 people who died after this school collapsed due to the rain. But the biggest disaster, Cyclone Nargis, hit Myanmar in early May, leaving some 140,000 dead or missing and causing suffering for more than 2 million people. With international aid agencies unable to get rapid access to those in need, the UN Secretary General traveled to Myanmar to pave the way for the full and unrestricted flow of aid. With so many developing countries affected by disaster, climate change, and now the twin crises, food and finance, world leaders met to renew their commitment to the Millennium Development Goals.
Our commitment is to drop this figure further,
a set of targets and timeframes endorsed 8 years ago to address the most crucial issues facing humanity in the next decade. While some targets, like universal education, are on track, others lag behind, like ending extreme poverty and hunger, especially in Africa. World leaders pledged $16 billion, but at year's end, there are fears that the financial crisis will reduce international donations. In 2008, for all too many, respect for the dignity and rights of all human beings still remained a distant vision. This despite the 60th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the standard against which all societies and all governments must be measured. 60 years on, it remains a shining example of what can be achieved through global solidarity. Ban Ki-moon.
The need for global solidarity is more important than ever. Crisis has brought us to this new multilateral moment. In crisis lies opportunity. From the economy to peace and security, from climate to energy and food, the time has come to take multilateralism to a new, stronger and more inclusive level.
With the food and finance crises now threatening the basic security of millions around the world, the United Nations is called upon once more to help, to build partnerships with governments and the private sector to help turn potential disaster into new opportunities.